The following program is a presentation of the Civil War Broadcasting Network, available on the free YouTube channel General Grant by himself or Dr. E.C. Fields, on the Facebook page Kurt Fields as General Ulysses S. Grant, and other various social media. The website is generalgrantbyhimself.com. This program is one of those presentations in the ongoing series General Grant Looks at the American Civil War, wherein General Grant looks at a person, place, or event in the Civil War for reflection and observation. Permission to copy and distribute is given, and indeed encouraged. Remember, you are the future of our past. And now, General Grant looks at the Siege of Vicksburg and its surrender, Part 1. I am Major General Ulysses S. Grant, and you find me in camp outside of Vicksburg, and I wish to reflect and look back on the siege and the surrender of Vicksburg, Mississippi, that with the surrender of Port Hudson, just south of Vicksburg, opened the Mississippi River from source to mouth for the Federal side and split the Confederacy in half. But there is much to what happened, particularly in the last few days of that 47-day siege. And I should like to review with you some of the paperwork that transpired, particularly on the Confederate side. We had pushed Pemberton back into Vicksburg on the 17th, 18th of May and assaulted him in an attempt to take Vicksburg by force on May 19th and then again on the 22nd. And we had gone into siege, digging the trenches, sniping at one another, having the sappers dig trenches ever closer to each other. On June the 15th, Pemberton sent this communication to his commanding officer, Joseph E. Johnston. Johnston had fallen back to northeast of Jackson, Mississippi, which is about 50 miles due east of Vicksburg, situated right on the Mississippi River. In fact, by June the 15th, I had about 71,000 troops in arms there at Vicksburg, but about half of them were indeed facing back to the east and northeast to guard against Joe Johnston trying to come in and free Pemberton. The other half or so of the army was facing due west against Pemberton bottled up in Vicksburg. But on the 15th of June, Pemberton sent this message to his commanding officer. The enemy has placed several heavy guns in position against our works and is approaching them very nearly by sap. His fire is almost continuous. Our men have no relief and become much fatigued, but are still in pretty good spirits. I think your movement should be made as soon as possible. The enemy is receiving reinforcements. We are living on greatly reduced rations, but I think sufficient for 20 days. Pemberton was constantly sending messages to Johnston and Johnston to Pemberton. Most of them were being intercepted. Messengers were being captured, and we were getting the information. So their communication back and forth was difficult at best. But by the 15th, we were very close to his lines and digging a mine under Confederate lines. And we did have very heavy guns in place. And as I said, about 71,000 troops. Johnston replied to this message, this entreaty to come out and assist Pemberton to get out of Vicksburg on June the 22nd. Now, he says on the 22nd, General Pemberton, Your dispatch of the 15th received. This is a week has gone by. General Richard Taylor is sent by General E.K. Smith, Edmund Kirby Smith, across the Mississippi in the Trans-Mississippi Theater to cooperate with you from the west bank of the river, to throw in supplies and to cross with this force, if expedient and practicable. I will have the means of moving toward the enemy in a day or two, and will try to make a diversion in your favor and, if possible, communicate with you, though I fear my force is too small to effect the latter. I have only 2/3 of the force you told the messenger Sanders to state to me as the least with which you thought I should make an attack. If I can do nothing to relieve you rather than surrender the garrison, endeavor to cross the river at the last moment if you and General Taylor communicate. J.E. Johnston. That was quite a daring plan and suggestion, because the Mississippi is pretty wide there at Vicksburg, and you've got two Confederate armies on the west side that can't get to Pemberton on the east side. Pemberton can't get from the east side to the west side, and no supplies are going to come across that river except perhaps by canoe, because Admiral Porter and the Navy squadron, ironclads and so forth, are heavily patrolling that river while they're shelling Vicksburg. So this is something of a plan of desperation, and the siege goes on. Now, they've been under siege since May the 17th. On June 23rd, General Pemberton sent this message to General Johnston. If I cut my way out, this important position is lost, and many of my men too. Can we afford that? If I cannot cut my way out, both position and all my men are lost. This we cannot afford. Should suggest the probability of Grant's being open to terms that can result more to our advantage than either of the above actions. Not knowing your force or plans, he may accede to your proposition to pass this army out with all its arms and equipage. This proposal would come with greater prospects of success and better grace from you, while it necessarily could not come from me. You could make the showing of my ability and strength to still hold our position for several weeks longer, which, together with his impression regarding your strength, might operate upon him to comply with your terms. While I make this suggestion, I still renew my hope of your being, by force of arms, enabled to act with me in saving this vital point. I will strain every nerve to hold out, if there is hope of our ultimately relief, for 15 days longer. This is on June 23rd, proposing 15 days longer, and referring to my not knowing Johnston's strength. I thought Johnston had 40,000, 50,000 and was expecting another 10,000 any day. It is reported that some of the enemy's forces have moved along the Hall's Ferry Road to Big Bayou near Warrenton, where they are temporarily massing. These movements indicate the lengthening of the enemy's lines and the increase of the area of his operations. J.C. Pemberton. We were tightening the noose, stretching our lines from north of the city to south of the city, and digging in ever closer to the Confederate lines. Also digging a mine. On June the 27th, just a couple of days later, Johnston sent this message in reply that got through to Pemberton. Your dispatch of the 22nd received. Now remember that this is now the 27th, the 22nd days have gone by. We've captured messengers and interfered with their communication. General E. Kirby Smith's troops have been mismanaged and have fallen back to Delhi. Louisiana. I have sent a special messenger urging him to assume the direct command. The determined spirit you manifest and his experienced cooperation encourage me to hope that something may yet be done to save Vicksburg, and to postpone both of the modes suggested of merely extricating the garrison. Negotiations with Grant for the relief of the garrison, should they become necessary, must be made by you. It would be a confession of weakness on my part, which I ought not to make, to propose them. When it becomes necessary to make terms, they may be considered as made under my authority. J.E. Johnston. So here we see, as late as June 27th, Johnston is pushing back on Pemberton the responsibility of approaching me with their marching out of Vicksburg with all their arms and equipage. Apparently they thought that I would accept that, which I would not have. But not only is he pushing back on him the proposal to speak to me, but he emphasizes it, saying it must be made by you. It would be a confession of weakness on my part, which I ought not to make, to propose them. But then he says, if terms become necessary, which sounds like he didn't really expect Pemberton to be able to get out, or he to get to Pemberton, you may make those terms under my authority. We're still tightening the noose day by day with Pemberton, getting ever closer, digging the mine that we ultimately detonated on July the 1st, and it blew a hole that I estimated 2 full regiments could be put in the crater that was blown under Pemberton's lines there on July the 1st at Vicksburg. But Pemberton, on June the 28th, got an anonymous and I should think a very disturbing letter from someone, and it reads, "In the trenches near Vicksburg, June 28th, 1863. So they've been under siege now since essentially May the 17th. It is now June 28th. Sir, in accordance with my own feelings and that of my fellow soldiers with whom I have conferred, I submit to your serious consideration the following note. We as an army have as much confidence in you as a commanding general as we perhaps ought to have. We believe you have displayed as much generalship as any other man could have done under similar circumstances. We give you great credit for the stern patriotism you have evinced in the defense of Vicksburg during a protracted and unparalleled siege. I also feel proud of the gallant conduct of the soldiers under your command in repulsing the enemy at every assault and bearing with patient endurance all the privations and hardships incident to a siege of 40-odd days' duration. Everybody admits that we have all covered ourselves in glory, but alas, General, a crisis has arrived in the midst of our siege. Our rations have been cut down to 1 biscuit and a small bit of bacon per day. Not enough scarcely to keep soul and body together, much less to stand the hardships we are called upon to stand. We are actually on sufferance, and the consequence is, as far as I can hear, there is complaining and general dissatisfaction throughout our lines. We are, and have been, kept close in the trenches day and night, not allowed to forage at all, and even if permitted, there is nothing to be had among the citizens. Men don't want to starve and don't intend to. But they call upon you for justice if the commissary department can give it. If it can't, you must adopt some means to relieve us very soon. The emergency of the case demands prompt and decided action on your part. If you can't feed us, you had better surrender us. Horrible as the idea, then suffer this noble army to disgrace itself by desertion. I tell you plainly, men are not going to lie here and perish if they do love their country dearly. Self-preservation is the first law of nature, and hunger will compel a man to do almost anything. This army is now ripe for mutiny unless it can be fed. Just think of one small biscuit and one or two mouthfuls of bacon per day. General, please direct your inquiries in the proper channel and see if I have not stated stubborn facts, which had better be heeded before we are disgraced. From, and it is signed, many soldiers. So Pemberton was having an extremely difficult time throughout the siege and was constantly appealing to his commanding officer, Joe Johnston, to come help him get out. Joe Johnston was, on the other hand, consistently from the earliest days of the siege telling Pemberton, get out of Vicksburg and give up the place rather than lose the army. We can do without the place. We must have the army. And Pemberton was being told by his president, Jefferson Davis, hold Vicksburg at all hazards. So Pemberton is obeying his commander-in-chief. Johnston was not making the efforts that Pemberton had hoped to come and get him out. And then as late as June the 28th, he gets a lengthy anonymous letter telling him rather sternly, surrender this army before disgracing us. Men are not going to starve. They will not, regardless of how they feel about their country. So Pemberton was in a very difficult situation as of June the 28th. On July 1st, we detonated that mine under the works, and or June the 25th, we detonated the first one. That left the hole that would hold 2 regiments. On July 1st, we detonated a second mine under the Confederate lines. So going into July the 3rd, Pemberton is in a desperate situation and facing obvious surrender. But I shall reflect more upon the communications between General Pemberton and myself on July the 3rd and 4th of 1863 in the second part of my reflections upon the siege and surrender of Vicksburg in part 2. For the moment, I have said quite enough on this matter, and I must be about my business. I bid you a fond adieu.